All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. We're just continuing our wonderful conversation here. The previous entry, we had talked about just the beginning of the buildup of addictions, and so that was a really great conversation. Let's go ahead and let's look at just the start of the recovery process. So, how one, I guess, would be like, when did you realize, when do people come to that conclusion that they need to enter that process, and then how does that process start, and we can build from there. So
Sure.
whether someone you know or yourself, I guess, what was that first real inclination that really hit you and said, okay, I've got to get something done?
Okay, so I can really only speak for myself. You know, I don't like to. I don't like to generalize because I don't know. It just
Right.
it seems a little offensive, I guess. I don't know, but
That makes sense.
so kind of going from what you're talking about and from last week, one of the things that I think that I didn't say is that in order for an addict to get to recovery, it has to be their choice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I didn't want anybody to think that you know, it was our responsibility to get them out of addiction.
Right.
You know, my whole thought process is more about what can we do as a community to keep, you know, to keep the light on it, and you know, the whole mess that's out there, and also be able to respond when that addict is ready.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that I deal with as a pastor. People call me, hey, my child, my spouse, they need help, they need Jesus. You know, they give me the whole rundown, and then I have to ask them a very important question: is, do they want to meet with me?
Right.
Do they want to go through that down this road with me? Because even I know that if they're not wanting to do that, if they're not wanting to enter that process, then no matter what I say, what I do, if it doesn't end in vitriol, if it doesn't end in a mess, then whatever progress we made is all just surface level, and it doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
And so to me, if somebody's really wanting to change, if they're really wanting to take steps, then I know that they're gonna have a desire to move forward on their own part, not because of some external influence.
Right. You know, and it's such a complicated conversation. The whole thing is just so complicated because there's this or there's that and everything else, you know. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that, you know, you can't do it for an addict.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do it for somebody else. The recovery, if you want real recovery, it has to be you really putting yourself into it, and so that takes effort from the addict. So to go into what you were talking about, so for me, let's see, in January 27th of 2018 was the last day that I used methamphetamines.
Okay.
And the reason that was the last day, well, the reason at that point was because I went to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And I was facing prison time. And this was a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, for the last probably almost 2 years prior to that, I was in and out of jail. And every time I went to jail, I would sleep it off.
Right.
Because on meth, you are up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need sleep. And so I would get my sleep in when I went to jail. And then when I finally got past that part, my only thought process was, how do I get out of here so I can go get high?
Right.
You know? So anyhow, in 2018, in January, they took me to jail, and they arrested me for burglary.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at prison time. And I was in jail, God, I guess it would have been about six months or so before I actually went to prison. The whole time I was there, my thoughts were that I just need to get through this. and then I'm going to go back and do what I was doing.
Right.
You
You're
know?
gonna sleep it off again, basically.
Well, sleep it off, and then when this time is done, I'm gonna probably go out, get high, sell drugs, do the same crap.
Mm-hmm.
And for a meth addict, I think it's it takes a while for their brain to uncloud,
Mm-hmm.
like, because it's very, very foggy and very you're very still focused on it for a very long time. So just to get to that point, well, I got to prison and I was sitting there, I guess it was about a year. So we're talking a year and a half afterwards. I had not used,
Mm-hmm.
and there's opportunities, but, I really just didn't like getting high when in prison or anything like that.
Right.
So I was sitting there one day and they were asking me, do you want to go to drug and alcohol treatment? And, I really didn't, because I knew that in my mind, I was like, well, all I'm going to do is bullshit them, and then just so I can get through it and then get that little certificate,
Right.
Well, I was sitting there and I was watching three guys just going at it, fighting like wild, and cops or the guards come running in, and there's just this big chaos moment, and everybody had to get on the ground and all that stupid stuff, and it hit me that it didn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
That what was going on did not bother me. And by the way, one of those guys went to the hospital for a very long time.
Wow.
But it was strange to me. I thought, God, at what point did violence and being told what to do and all this stuff, at what point did this become normal to me?
Right.
And so I started thinking about that. I'm like, God, I don't even care that I just got 4 years in prison. It didn't, it's just, I'm going to do this and then move on. It scared me.
Right.
Because I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. If I have to change something.
Right.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to be stuck in and out of jail or prison, like it was like an awakening moment for me, because it was, so when you're in jail, prison, whatever, you have contact with your family,
Right.
but you don't have connection.
Mm-hmm.
They might come visit you, they might not. You might get money, whatever, but really you're stuck in a box
Mm-hmm.
with 200 other guys who hate their lives just as much as you do. And so it's just a very angry, very hostile environment. And for someone to get used to that is, they call it institutionalized, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But, for someone to get used to that, there's a problem,
Right.
And so I had to track back. Okay, why am I used to this? Well, I've done time throughout my whole life.
Right.
And what was it all about? Always comes back to drugs. And so at that point, I contacted, I was in Faribault prison at the time. I contacted the counselor there, and I said, you know what? Yeah, I would like to do drug and alcohol treatment. And so that began. And I went to drug and alcohol treatment. And in prison, it's watered down. It's politically correct. It's it's all these strange things. But it wasn't about what they were trying to do. It finally turned around where it was, what was I trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID hit.
Right.
And so then everything got shut down.
Right.
So I didn't really get to go. They graduated me,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't really do, like everybody does, like 6 months of constant everyday groups, counseling, meetings,
Yeah.
the whole shebang. I had about a month and a half of that.
Oh, so instead of having the normal that 24/7, essentially 6 months of 24/7 accountability,
Right.
COVID was like, here, we're going to abbreviate it,
Right.
and we're going to say that you passed.
Right. And so I was in it for about a month and a half, and then, like I said, COVID had hit, and so they kind of shut us all down. We basically had to come out staggered, where a couple of people could come out of their rooms, and they'd have to go back in. We couldn't have groups. We couldn't, and I was actually in the dog program at the time, so I had a dog, so I was able to get out of my room a little more, which was beautiful. But
Yeah.
so that animal, I feel like, saved my life.
Yeah.
And it's very strange to say, but I had to focus on taking care of something else.
Mm-hmm.
I had to focus on the way I acted towards this particular animal, because I wanted to train it for somebody who was blind or disabled, because that's what they do the training for.
Okay.
And so it was a blessing.
Yeah.
Because the COVID thing hit, they shut everything down. Had I not still been in that dog program, I don't know where I would have went with it, because suddenly suddenly it's like, this doesn't matter,
Right.
to the rest of the world. It didn't matter. What mattered was COVID.
Right.
And so anyhow, I was there for a couple more months, and they started to release people who would have trouble with COVID and this, that, and the other. And it never occurred to me that I could get, released early,
Right.
Because that doesn't happen in Minnesota. You don't. There's no such thing as released early. They don't have a parole board or anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So when they actually said, "Yeah, we're going to let you go home," the
Right.
next day I was home.
Oh, wow.
It was a little bit of a surprise, but
So I want to catch that, because I mean that to me, given the state of things, so the recovery that you're in, you have an animal that you're being able to be a caretaker for and to train, so you get to have that outlet of
Right.
being responsible, and then within just a matter of in less than a couple days, we're gonna send you home, and the next day you're like, oh, here I am. So there was no like for me, it takes me almost a couple weeks for me to process change,
Right.
big change, and in living arrangements, it can take me several weeks
Right.
to process a change in living arrangements. And so you go from one place to the next in just within what is essentially, maybe I'm paraphrasing here, but even a couple of hours, exaggerating on that, but
Not really exaggerated.
probably not really.
No.
but just to show, I guess maybe just to show a little bit of the, for lack of a better word, maybe just the shock on the system, the shock on the mindset.
Well, see, for you,
Would it be the relief though when you walk out of there finally? The one thing you haven't talked about a lot is you did a lot of stuff for meetings and stuff like this before, and all the stuff that you were talked about there. Did any of that stuff get through to you before you went to prison?
yeah, yes, it did. It was that seed, I guess, that was planted. I knew where I could go if I got to that point. I don't think I was ready at that because there was a period of time when I was clean for a while, and then things just kind of went to hell, and I was back out getting
Right.
high again. So, and that's what he's talking about. And I definitely absorbed some of the things that were being said. I got the highlights of it. The importance of, you have to go to a meeting. You can only do this one day at a time. That's always stuck to me, and that I need to have somebody to talk to. Which is a sponsor. So yeah, I think some of it did. It was enough so that I knew where to go when the time actually came. If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea that for you to have that change is a little different for me.
Right.
Because in prison, they'll move you. You don't know until they come up and say, "Hey, pack your stuff. You're moving."
Right.
And you move to a different prison, a whole different
Well, and
area.
so
It's not a real.
Yeah.
At first, it's very jolting to you. After a while, you just like, okay, good,
Well,
something new.
And that's a military thing too. Military, they you get your assignments day in day in.
Right.
You know, growing up in that environment as a with family in the military, I've seen it secondhand from them. And so even in the prison system having that, and so it is really different because I'm like that's me processing, and so I don't want to put in the way my mind works in that, but
But your mind probably works more closer to a normal person's than mine does.
I'm not normal.
You know what I mean? Like most people, that would be jolting to them.
Yeah.
To me, it just wasn't. It isn't.
The standard person on the
Now,
street.
getting out, it was exciting, but was it? It was exciting because I could go to a refrigerator again and get what I wanted to eat. I could use the bathroom when I wanted. I could walk out of my room. I could walk out of my house.
Yeah.
And so that part of it was like, yeah, great.
Yeah.
But one of the first things that I did, because so on this COVID thing though, when they let you out, you were on house arrest until your regular parole started. So I had to be on house arrest for, I think it was about 7 months.
Okay.
Which means they put an ankle bracelet on you.
Yeah, the monitoring and all
Yeah,
that.
and you only get so much time to go to a grocery store, or you can go to a meeting, whatever. But one of the first things that I did when I got out was I contacted, who is my sponsor now, a guy named Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the best thing that I could have done for myself, because he was in the program for several years at that point, and was very involved and healthy for the program itself. He was a fixture. I guess he's kind of a fixture, right? He's
Getting there.
yeah, but he was somebody that I also used to get high with. I used to sell him drugs, used to get high with him, so it was it was easier to reach out to him.
Well, someone you knew
Yeah.
who had been in the trenches with you,
Right.
and had come out the other end.
Yes. And so I contacted him, and I didn't ask him to be a sponsor or anything. I just asked him, can you take me to a meeting? And and he was on it. I mean, he was happy to get me to a meeting, and I went to quite a few meetings.
Yeah.
I didn't do a whole lot of talking at first, just because part of me was still processing that I was out of prison. Part of me was still processing, is this really what I wanted to do? I really want to stay clean? And at that point I was almost at 2 years, maybe even more. I was like 2.5 years. And so there was a lot going on, plus there were people in there who I had disappointed earlier, and so that was a little hard,
Right.
But the first thing that I did was I reached out to somebody, and that changed the whole course of what could have happened. It changed it completely, because he started kind of showing up at my house, unwelcomed, by the way.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But he would show up. Hey, you want to go to a meeting? Call me. Hey, you want to go over here? Or hey, how about I stop by? We sit and talk.
Right.
And initially when I got out of prison, a lot of the people that I used to get high with or whatever, they tried to contact me, and there were a couple of them that I actually talked to. But it got to where it was very strange to see, because Steve wasn't interested in anything other than recovery. How can we get life going? How can we do better? They were interested in, so when are you getting off parole? Are you going to get back in the game? This person is doing this, that person's doing that.
You essentially started having two crowds, two groups of people. One is, let's get you back in the mess.
I was able to see both points of view.
Yeah.
I was able to see.
You were seeing both sides.
And I realized that this side wasn't interested in me at all.
Right.
They weren't. They didn't care. They just wanted to know if I was going to get back in the game so that they could get their drugs.
Well, they go back into the past,
Right.
where the other person says, "Let's go to your future.
Right.
Let's think ahead."
Right.
And these other ones are like, "No, get us back in the mess."
And the weird part is nothing changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I was gone for about 2.5 years. Nothing changed to over here. But over here with Steve, there was all kinds of change.
Right.
You know, and I don't mean just as a person, but you could see his whole life was different.
And I think that's a key thing is there was life there.
Right.
And whereas in one sense there was this old past, these things that were being destructive, you can see just there's nothing happening.
Yeah,
you know,
same story.
Yeah. Whereas this other side is like, look at how he's changed his life, look at what he's involved in, look at what he's doing. At what point did he start living forward as opposed to staying in the mess?
Right.
And I think for some people, like you say, this is a guy that you knew who used to be in that mess, who was there in the trenches with you.
Right.
And what's fascinating about that is you used to see him in one way, and now he's living another way. And I think that can be powerful for a lot of people if we can connect the spiritual component in there. Is, you know, they're no longer who they once were. There's something different and vibrant about that individual.
Something's
working. And then the next progressional question is, I kind of want what they got.
And that's exactly kind of what happened. Is I started to see all these other people, and I started deleting their numbers, and I started just pushing away from it.
Yeah.
Because I saw, well, I could do this because he's done it. I could do this, and I know he was just as deep in the trenches as I was. So, you know, it was. I don't know that it was all inspiring at first, but it was definitely a curiosity. Like, well, how did he do that? You know, what is he doing that is different? You know, and the beauty of it is that he's an addict. Which, by the way, I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but an addict is an addict for life.
Right.
That does not change. We are either in recovery or we're in active addiction.
Right.
You know, there's a little messy where they say it's what is it? It's in between where you're a dry drunk or whatever that is.
I've heard that term, dry drunk.
But you know, but you're still not using. You're not in active addiction. But so. I've kind of forgot where. Oh, so, you know, he piqued my curiosity,
right?
And this is when recovery really started for me, because I started to watch. This was another thing is that an addict. I don't necessarily want to know what Byron is saying. Mm-hmm. I want to know what Byron's doing.
Right.
So we watch that person is his mouth matching his actions, you know, and that's kind of what I started to do, you know, and I started to realize that it really does, because the thing that they talk about, and I think probably the most important thing for an addict to get to really blossom in recovery is honesty. Mm-hmm. You know, honesty is a release. It gives you back everything you've lost.
Well, there's an amazing.
It really does.
There's two amazing points that happen in scriptures, and one, in one sense, in the Old Testament, there's a passage in one of the prophet books, and he gets him called out. He says. And I'm going to paraphrase it here because I don't have the reference in front of me. He says, "You worship me with your lips, yet your hearts are far from me." And that's that one thing. It's like we can do a great lip service and all these things, but to really show the difference between somebody who really believes what they're doing and a hypocrite is going to be defined completely by how they live, how their actions, like you said, they're doing. And so, like you said, the addict looks, okay, what is that person doing? Not what are they saying, but what are they doing? And then I think when we start having that consistency, The Bible says, "Let your light shine before all men." It's not saying let your words shine before all men. He's saying let your life, let your deeds shine before all men. And so that's an important part of.
That's a big part of recovery.
It's a huge part of recovery. And I think, and that's a great admonition both for the addicts who are in the midst of recovery, and for the church at large, is make sure what you say lines up with what you live, because everyone's paying attention to that.
Right, and you're going to make mistakes. Like
Yes.
nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
But and what I mean by honesty is I don't mean spill your guts about every last thing you've done. That's not what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about honesty, as far as in the program, I'm talking about I'm not going to bullshit. If Byron's on some garbage,
Right.
and he's not seeing it, I'm going to be honest with him.
Right.
Right? And I'm hoping that he'll do the same for me. And then I can be honest with myself. Like,
Right.
okay, this isn't right. Maybe I need to change this. And then there's also the part where I say, I'm going to do this. And I do it.
Right.
And, honesty, he's like you said, it gives you a freedom. It's a freeing thing.
Yeah.
It opens up that I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not. I don't have to hide from anybody.
Yeah.
At this point in my life, I don't have to hide.
So-
I really don't.
Yeah. So honestly, and this is what's really good about honesty, is this idea that, one, we're not covering up the messes.
Right.
Right. We're not. And so by that, like, we're not
You're not lying to lie
We're not lying to lie.
to make the other lie.
We're not sitting there like opening the floodgates of whatever junk that we just want to pour out into every person, right? But we're also not going to sugarcoat life.
Right.
I think that's a
We're
big one.
not creating the messes anymore, because
Right.
now we're doing stuff open. And the one thing that's nice about recovery is that if you talk to me in 3 weeks from now, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told you 3 weeks ago,
Right.
because I don't have to have a story. We always talked about having notebooks
Right.
when you come into. Okay, let's see this. I said this to this guy on Friday, this guy on Thursday, and I can't be with these people because I lied to all three of them.
Right.
You don't have to cover that anymore because of the fact your life is open, honest, and willing to change. And
Yeah. There's a passage in the Gospels where it says that men love darkness because their deeds are dark, and the things that they do in the darkness. And it's this whole idea of like deceiving other people, hiding things, hiding what we're doing. And when we're willing to be open, when we're willing to let the light shine on our lives, then that's where, yes, the junk is going to come out. That's just the nature of what the light does. You want to fool your parents into thinking that your bedroom is clean. Great, keep the lights off and cover all your toys with a blanket, right? The parent knows.
I think I've done that
The
before.
parent knows. But once the parent goes in, it's like, all right, let's see what the real issue is, and they turn the light on, they pull the blanket up, and they're like, okay, this has got to be taken care of. Right. It's not a judgmental thing. It's not a hateful thing. This is not safe for you. So we have to expose it. We have to look at it and say, hey, if you want to be healthy, if you want to be whole, this has got to be dealt with. And having that openness, and that's hard because, again, people love darkness. We like to keep things enclosed, and now it's like, okay, we're going to pull the veil back.
So
but when it comes to an addict, if you challenge that addict, he's going to fight you.
Oh, absolutely.
All the way. You got to do it in a softer.
Yes.
That's why when it comes it's a lot easier for me to sit and talk to somebody about addiction than it's going to be for you.
Oh, absolutely.
The reason is because I can say, remember those nights when you were feeling this way, or when you were feeling, and all of a sudden you can see this twinkle in their eye that they're starting to realize that I know what you're talking about.
One of the lights that kind of came into my mind one time, one of the realizations I had was when my oldest son was born. I have done youth ministry for years. I have mentored teens. I had babysit kids. I taught classes with children. I love children. But the moment my own child was born, it was as if somebody had flipped a switch in my mind, and I began to understand a way that present fathers think. And it was something that completely changed. And as my children have grown, I understood in parenthood more and more and more because I've gone through it. you know. And so I can talk to a parent completely different than I can talk to somebody who's never been a parent. You know, the priorities are completely different. And so, you know, so I get to approach those two different ways because I've been there. Regarding addiction, you know, when it comes to drug and alcohol, I've never been there. And so dealing with those ones is completely different versus other struggles I've gone through. And so again, what's nice is, okay, because I have my struggles and the things that I have fought and what I have gone through, there like you said, there's this amazing way that you know the gentleness you need to approach that individual because of what they're in.
And it may not even be a gentle approach, but so for me, you could be talking to me, and this happens actually in treatment centers and things like that, where they get counselors who have not actually been an addict prior. But when you start talking to me about it, it's like I'm listening to you,
right.
But in my head, I'm like, he has no idea what he's talking about.
Right. Well,
not because you don't know what the book tells you or what you've seen, but because you don't actually know what it's like to be an addict.
Yeah.
So it makes it, you know. So when I look at Byron and I'm like, God, he's really been through it.
Right.
He understands it. It opens that door a little bit more because it's like, okay, somebody understands me. He
right.
doesn't know me, but he knows me. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
You get that connection through addiction. You know, which is just the strangest thing to say, but you know.
Yeah, well, that's like because my mind I go to like a zoologist. You got to handle an animal,
right?
And you can tell by people on their entire approach, their conversation, the way they walk up to you, this person knows how to handle that beast. Versus somebody who's like completely ignorant and they walk in and like right. They try to be sensitive, they try to be tactful, they try to come in their way, right. And you're like, that person is a fool. Right. They've never been here. They've never felt
how to do it, but that doesn't you know. Well, there's a difference between actual experience and you know, and that's in any aspect of life. Yeah. So I kind of wanted to come back just a little bit.
Yeah, please.
So, so there was a point with Steve where I really had he wanted me to look at steps. Mm-hmm. There's 12 steps in the program. I'm not going to tell you what they are. Because,
no, that's fine.
Because I'm not sure that's appropriate. I'm not sure.
Well, and
it comes from the Bible.
It really does.
There's scriptural based. There's scriptural based.
It is.
And then depending upon those foundations, I know personally that some steps they vary program by program, and I'm not talking big variances. Right. I'm talking like, you know, what would be step 2 at this one at step 4. Right. You know, and so there is variances.
So for me, the reason I'm not comfortable really revealing some of that is because the program, the NA program, AA program is very, it's an anonymous program, right. and they have some fairly strict thoughts when it comes to putting it out there.
Well,
it's not meant to be a public.
Two things.
Yeah.
Two things. One, like you said, it's supposed to be anonymous.
Yes.
And so
and I mean, let's respect that. Anonymous, by the way.
Yeah. So let's respect that.
Yeah.
And then the other one is we're not treatment.
No.
This video recording, the stuff that we do, this is not treatment. It's not about that. So we don't want to necessarily put that stuff out there so that people use these videos as treatment.
Right.
This is a tool, a dialogue to help the community understand something better.
Right.
To shed a light on this whole area of our community that might be only partially, if not misunderstood.
Right.
The big thing in both NA and AA is anonymity.
Mm-hmm.
What we talk about in those meetings, you do not talk about it on the outside. Now, if you want to talk about the program itself, there's no problem with talking about the program at all. I don't stand on a street corner with a sandwich board saying, come talk to me about it. Right. But I'll tell you what, when somebody comes up and talks to me, I'm not afraid to open my mouth. Yeah, I can talk about this. Right. And that's something you can't worry
to
about.
An individual. So I agree. Like if someone approaches me, absolutely, I'm like, you know, whatever. But this is kind of a bigger venue, and I'm not sure that, I'm not sure how approach that whole idea. So I'm just going to kind of, I feel like I should just kind of, not necessarily, I think maybe I should ask the people there, the board maybe, and see what they would feel about that. But anyhow, to get back to
respecting others
right,
involved, yeah.
To get back to it, so this whole beginning was with my sponsor was that I really had to look at my addiction and how unmanageable my life was, and where it had led me to, and so so that's kind of where the honesty part of it really had to start, because I'm not saying there's a little a part of the program where eventually we are honest with ourselves, with God, and with another human being.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a scary thing. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's very scary. So a lot of people will try and they will take the longest time they can to get there,
right.
Which is whatever. But to start it, you really have to kind of think about, you really have to see yourself as an addict. You can't be like, well, I'm an addict and my life is unmanageable, but but I can get my fix here, get cured, and then I can go back out. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
I mean, it happens for a lot of people, but in order to stay in recovery and just and to be healthy, you can't see it in that way. I had to finally surrender to that whole idea.
Yeah.
That I'm an addict.
Yeah.
I'm always going to be an addict. It's never going to change. Even if I go back out, and I went out quite a few times. If I go back out, I'm still that addict, and I'm still going to be that same. And as a matter of fact, they talk a lot about that, where you left off, you're right back at it,
Yeah.
or even
Yeah.
worse, because there's this guy who talks about the addiction is out front doing push-ups, waiting on you.
Yeah.
While you're trying to get recovery. So it's building itself so that if you do go back, it's just as strong, if not stronger.
Yeah.
So then the next point that you start to get to is they start to build this spirituality thing. And spirituality in the program, they talk about higher power, and I don't, to me, it doesn't matter what someone believes. Whatever is helpful for them at that point in their lives, I'm great with, and so I don't judge that. I prefer that they use what they have to.
Right. Well, because
the tools that you get.
At that point, it's all about getting off the mess.
Right.
And they're in such a sensitive place right there already. My mind, because as a pastor, as a believer of Jesus Christ, I'm like, there is no other higher power. There is only one. And so I'm like, the preacher in me is like, give them the real deal. But at the same time, we have to recognize where people's journeys are at. Right. And they may or may not be willing to handle that level of truth while they're still they're again, my mind, I picture them on such a fractured foundation already, just in the recovery process of trying to bring healing just their own physical body and mental state right there, that yes, if something's working for them, then let them get further along in the recovery process, and then come and say, hey, by the way, check this guy out. Check Jesus out. Right. In that sense.
I think a lot of people come to that on their own. They really.
I think so. Well, because they're already searching for truth.
Yeah.
They're looking for a higher power.
I don't know that they would say Jesus particularly, but God.
God's the more generic. That's the more like that is what they're looking for.
Right. But so, did you have something?
I like to say the deal is, I call it higher power because of the fact that I'm not insulting anybody else's religion.
Right. Well, because they're at a place right now where the level of respect that they need to have, the respect they need to feel in order to go forward in this process, it needs to be given.
I've had people that have come up to me after I spoke and said that I'm glad you kept it at higher power, because when you label,
Right.
you know, Buddha, Allah, God, whatever,
You're going.
somebody's going to be pushed off. Somebody's
Right.
going to be thrown to the side real quickly.
Yeah.
See, and
Yeah.
the beauty of NA is that it allows you to personalize your higher power, and that's important in your recovery, because for me, this is all I don't ever really want to talk about other people's. If they want to talk about it, it's fine with me. But for me, that process was great. I don't even know how to explain it, but you know, I started out at this really like, okay, I need something that is bigger than me and can get me through this time. Well, it kind of started out like the group, you know,
Right.
and then it was, you know, my sponsor was like, well, you know, why don't you try praying, you know,
Right.
and so that relationship started to develop, because I didn't pray like a normal person prays.
Right.
I talked to God. I
Yeah.
literally had conversations, and I really started to develop this relationship that that I would never give up again.
Right.
You know, it was it sounds crazy. You know, when I say it out loud, it sounds kind of crazy. You know, I literally was having conversations, you know, and I found myself, the hard part of that development was the listening,
Right.
you know, because I could say all I wanted, you know, and sometimes, you know, I wasn't happy, or sometimes I was happy, you know, but the listening part was the hard part. And,
Yeah.
and when I was, so in this development, when I started to hear my higher power, which I call God, everything changed for me. The lights that were already on a little bit suddenly became bright, you know, and that's what the 12 steps does. It takes you through this process. It takes you, you look, it doesn't push you. It guides you, and so I need to get to the second floor, so I have to take one step at a time.
Right.
Because if you try to jump steps, you're going to miss everything that was here, and you're going to fall back down.
Right.
It's just going to happen. So it's you take these steps as you go, and really the ultimate goal for that is that personal development with your spiritual self and your higher power. Believe it or not, that's exactly what it comes down to. And I know it's how you live and everything else, but if you really read it, it's about developing that relationship, you know, and so then you go back over it, because, you know, going through the 12 steps one time gives you that good feel and that general understanding, but every time you go through it, you start to see exactly, you know, and maybe it's because you're changing, you start to see different things, you know, you start to develop your moral compass. You start to develop your goals and how to get there, because as an addict in active addiction, I did not know how to live. I did not. You could have told me how to get to that door, and I would have been on every wall bouncing up and down before I got to the dang door.
Right.
You know, it's just how I was, and imagine most people are the same way in addiction.
Right.
Because it's messy. But so you start to really like learn how to live life, you know, and so I'm at a point in my recovery where I want everyone to have this, you know, and I have a long ways to go. There's a lot of things that I have that I still need to learn, I still need to change, and everything else, but it's given me back my relationships with my family. You know, it's given me my relationships with my kids, my grandkids. It's given me, at least open that door again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have learned how to be responsible. I have learned how to be honest in my life. I have, like, financially, I'm okay. I own things that I never really thought I would, I was out of prison for almost a year, and I bought my first motorcycle coming out of prison. Not my first motorcycle, but coming out of prison, and I bought it with cash.
Oh, there you go.
And I was so proud of myself.
Yeah.
Because I was like, God, and I bought a brand new car, cash, and it was because I worked hard, and the pride I felt,
right,
and pride can get in your way. So, I'm not saying that I'm prideful. I'm saying I enjoy the excitement. I'm proud of myself.
Yes. The excitement surrounding an accomplishment.
Right. And and then there's all that, but then I started to be active in the program, as far as outside of just meetings or just having time with my sponsor. I started to actually do things with the other people, go to these functions, do service work.
Yeah.
Which is an important thing, and service work is basically doing something without expectation.
Right. Well,
what I mean?
It's in the label, service.
Right.
You're not expecting. I mean, not service industry, but a service project. You're doing it to serve something, not in the sense of receiving.
When we use it, you're always looking for the pat on the back.
Yeah. Where's
Right. Service, you're not.
Yeah.
You were always after something. It was a manipulation somehow, shape or form. Yeah. So this is where I'm at in my program right now.
No, that's great.
I enjoy doing things for other people.
Yep.
A lot of times I like to bless a stranger or somebody who really needs help, or or even it's very hard to explain.
Well,
it's just
so I think a great way, and we're gonna have to take like 2 more minutes, like less than 2 more minutes here, because this video is already quite long.
right.
But one thing to harken back to when you were inside the prison system and you had to take care of that animal, and you had that dog that you cared for, that you were responsible for, and just that impact that you were functioning for something else outside yourself.
Right.
Whereas the drugs are, let me fill myself. What do I want to feel? What do I need? Where is my next hit? Whereas taking care of the animal, you had to pour all your energy into that. And so this process has taken to a point where transformation has happened so much where now it's like the desire has changed. I want to help somebody else. I want to. So the focus has generally shifted from being so inward to now it's like you're looking outside saying, okay, who needs what?
And that's kind of what this is about.
Yeah.
But I can tell you right now that everything that I've done to help in a situation or somebody else has come back to me. Mm-hmm. It really has. And it's so strange to see sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, but the first time that I did something and it kind of came back, I thought, oh, that was kind of cool, And then I realized that that God was doing this for me.
Yep.
He was, I'd hear that little whisper like, she could probably use some help with her groceries. Why don't you just get those? Mm-hmm. And then next thing I know, 2 days later, something happens where it
Yeah.
comes back tenfold. And
Yes.
I'm not necessarily saying financial or anything like
No.
that. I'm saying spiritually and that inside person that just
Yeah.
you feel so good
Yeah.
about who you are as a person, because you're no longer being selfish.
Yeah.
I'm no longer taking from the world. I'm no longer
Yeah. Well, there's some.
there's just so
There's something amazing in God's economy. Not man's economy,
Right.
not the U.S., not in our flesh, but in God's spiritual economy, there is this amazing grace exchange that occurs when we begin living for others and to living outside of flesh, outside of self. Like, what are my needs? What are my desires? And I start giving. Not even just finances, just giving time, giving my talent, or giving my treasures, whatever that may be. What's amazing in that is that as we give without no thought of return, the Lord pays attention to those things, and we begin seeing those returns.
Well,
like tithing is a great example.
Isn't there a passage about that? Like, He will fill your cup, or
He will take care of your if you give, He does it.
how did I'm
There's a couple passages. A lot of it is there's tithing, and tithing it talks about one. The Bible says the Lord loves a cheerful giver, so He loves a cheerful giver, and He says, and then in Micah, it actually starts off as a rebuke. He says, "You have stolen from the Lord and not given as you were supposed to." He goes, "You give as you're supposed to. Test me in this, and see if I will not open up the storehouses of heaven for you."
Right, and I don't think that he's talking about necessarily finance.
Exactly, I agree.
I feel like it. So
There's a level of grace that comes back
Right.
in other things, whether it's somebody's dropping groceries off on your doorstep, or you have something happen where a need you had gets taken care of, whether it's financially or provisionally. God just does those things.
if you just love your neighbor,
Yes,
I
God
mean,
takes care of the rest.
Yeah, He fills you with love, because how else can you love? You can't give that love if you don't have it in you.
Yeah,
Right, so the more that I give it, the more it
Yeah.
just kind of keeps coming back, and that's kind of and I don't do it for that purpose. As a matter of fact, a lot of times when I feel depressed,
Right.
or I feel angry, or I feel sad, the very first thing that my sponsor will say to me is, "Well, why don't you go do something for somebody else?" Actually, a lot of times he doesn't have to say that to me anymore, because I do it anyhow. But
Right.
but because I know that when I'm not focused on me
Right.
and my problems and my issues, that somehow it kind of takes care of it doesn't always take care of itself, but it lightens that whole thought of it's so terrible, because as an addict everything is freaking terrible to me,
Well, it's
And
taking
I'm
your perspective from
over.
here
Yeah.
and saying, "Look over here." So
Right.
it's we're not being ignorant of the trouble. We're not being ignorant of the depression or the issue, whatever is your storm. We're not being ignorant of that. And it doesn't. We're not saying it stops. We're not choosing to turn a blind eye to it. We're just simply saying, "I want my attention to be over at this place. I'll handle this,
Right.
but I've got to focus over here for
Right.
my peace of mind." And so,
You always find yourself a message. There's always it's very strange, but you get yourself involved in something, and suddenly it's like,
yeah, the light bulb goes
because
on.
you take yourself away from that situation.
Yep.
But what I want to say though is that recovery has given me happiness.
Mhm.
It has given me hope. It has given me love.
Mhm.
It has given me people in my life that love me.
Mhm.
It has given me so much, and because of that, I really would like the community or all of us to understand that, okay, as an addict, nobody liked me.
Right.
I was at the bottom of the barrel. People they didn't just not like me, they hated me. They didn't want me around. They were scared if I was around.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I was not a good person.
Right.
You know, but today, most people would probably be like, yeah, he's a good guy. He's all right. You know,
Well, they're seeing the transformation, is what it is.
right. So that can happen for any addict.
Yes.
And that's one of the points I want to get across, is that anybody can do this if given the chance.
Yep. And I think this is a great place where we'll conclude here,
Right.
just because of the time and the length of this. So thank you for sticking around and being part of the conversation. But yeah, just the fact that having that transformation, having that love, having this a new start, a new you essentially, is possible for anybody. And I think that's important that we get to encourage that. So
Right.
yeah, thank you so much, and until next time.